which is Rabbi Rachel Ain. Rabbi Ain is the rabbi of the Sutton Place Synagogue in Manhattan. Rabbi Ain is also one of the leaders who, when COVID came about, really jumped on the opportunity and made, I think, the entire movement much more accessible into both in congregational life and in movement life to our congregants at a time that they were isolated. And Rabbi Ain, I know you've written more on that over the last couple of weeks. I've seen your interviews. We really appreciate that. And I also have to say that I understand that you're the loving aunt of Zoe and Judah. I got paid to say that, so don't. I know where they had dinner tonight. So without further ado, Rabbi Rachel Ain.
Thank you so much. It is really an honor to be here with my colleagues, my friends, and our community around the world as we celebrate this holiday. Let me acknowledge, I imagine this has been a trope throughout the day, what is going on in Israel. And as we think about our brothers and sisters there, and we think and we hope for peace. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. So I want to paint some different pictures in your mind as we explore the notion of community and covenant and where do we fit in as we celebrate this holiday of Shavuot. It was 1987 and I was 10 years old. And I was living in Washington, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., in Potomac, Maryland. And my parents took me down to the mall, not the mall where you go shopping, but the mall on Washington for the huge, huge rally for the freedom of Soviet Jewry. I don't know if when I was 10 years old, I quite understood what was going on or why I was going. But when I got there, I heard and learned two very important messages. Number one, that we are our brother's keepers, that we are responsible for Jews worldwide, and we need to speak out and we need to speak up. But I also began to understand that each smaller Jewish community is connected to a larger ecosystem. When I got downtown to that mall at 10 years old, what did I see? I saw busloads of people that I knew from Camp Ramah. People that were living in Massachusetts, people that were living in Alabama, people that were living in Virginia, people that were living in Albany. All of a sudden, I began to realize that being Jewish is not just about the people that you go to synagogue with or that you go to school with, but they are the people in your world. Fast forward to 1993, and I went on US-wide Poland pilgrimage, where I spent 9 days in Poland, learning our history of the Jewish people there, learning the horrors, and then going to Israel and understanding that there was something that atrocious had happened and we needed to learn more about it. But when I left that summer of 1993, I actually admittedly did not pledge to learn more about the Holocaust and more about Israel because I already had been learning at my school. What I actually committed to was engaging in Jewish ritual. And I came home and I said to my family, I know that our house is already kosher, but I actually want to keep kosher outside of the house. That there were so many Jews who were murdered, who didn't have the choice to commit to Jewish ritual. And that was something that I wanted to do. My congregants are often surprised when they learn that I didn't grow up keeping kosher, but I didn't. And I took it on out of a symbol, not just to God. God actually was not the reason I decided to keep kosher, but it was because of what being a part of a Jewish people meant to me. So what I want to explore tonight is, what does this mean? What does it mean to be a part of a community? What is our covenant? And that brings me to the final story from just a few weeks ago, which is when we had a bar mitzvah. So I was introduced talking about how I've attempted, and only history will tell if I was right or wrong or somewhere in between, to expand our boundaries to include people in this new virtual digital way. And so for our B'nai Mitzvah, so far during the pandemic, what we've been doing at Sutton Place Synagogue is involving people both in the room and on Zoom. And we had a bar mitzvah in April of a young man who was supposed to have his bar mitzvah last year in Buenos Aires, where he was from. He and his family moved to the east side a few years ago when his mom got a job at the UN. And they were supposed to go back for his bar mitzvah, but due to the pandemic, they were not able to go. And so fast forward to this April, and we decided to have it here. But his family doesn't live in New York. His family lives in Israel. His family lives in Spain. His family lives in Argentina. And there was something so incredible about that Shabbat morning, knowing that Jews all over were celebrating that Shabbat, not only to celebrate Shabbat, but to celebrate a young man coming of age into the Jewish people. But how did this get established, the idea of community and covenant and the notion of Jewish peoplehood? I believe that it begins in Genesis 12, and if you'd like to put the text up on the page, you can do so now. And we read in Genesis 12, now the Lord God said to Avram, get out of thy country, from thy kindred, and from your father's house, unto the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. When we get to Genesis 12 here, we hear nothing about kashrut. We don't even hear anything about Shabbat. We don't see anything about Torah study. What we see here is a beginning of a family that will turn into a nation and a people. The initial covenant between God and Avram was about being connected to something larger than just ourselves. And we see that go even further when we get to Genesis 17. That when Abraham, who became Avraham, was 99 years old, God appeared before him and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be wholehearted. And I will make a covenant with me and thee, and I will multiply thee exceedingly. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee throughout the generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to be a seed after thee. And I will give to thee, to thy seed after thee, the land of thy sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your seed after thee. Every male among you shall be circumcised. So here we are. You can just stop for a sec. Wait, just stop. Here we are, 5 chapters later, and we've moved from a sense of Jewish family and even Jewish people to a sense of covenant, that there's going to be something beyond that. So not only is this about an initial blessing of a people for a people by God, but now we're seeing a people in relationship with God, covenant, a brit, something that we're celebrating on this holiday of Shavuot, in a land with ritual. Now, we can have a different conversation about borders of those lands. That's actually not important. What's important is that there is this spiritual homeland that we've been connected to. How we figure out how to live there is a conversation way beyond me. But then we look at verse 10. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your seed after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. The sign of the covenant, the ritual of Brit Milah. Again, the same word, covenant, comes up again. I'm a mom of 2 boys. People have asked me, didn't you have a hard time doing the bris for your sons? I said, I actually found it to be one of the most meaningful moments of my life, because I was entering our sons, my husband, Rabbi Dave Levy, and I entered our sons into the covenant of the Jewish people. And that's one way of doing it. And that we go beyond our own needs, but we understand the history of our people. And we see that being in covenant with God means looking beyond ourselves. Rabbi Louis Jacobs, in A Jewish Theology, says the Genesis narratives were woven and originally told in the form of saga. These traditional stories were eventually put together to form, or more or less, a continuous narrative that we have in Genesis as part of the Heilsgeschichte, the sacred history in which God makes God's covenant about the patriarchs, I'll add, and matriarchs, and their descendants. The Genesis narratives as a whole is about the covenant, about God and Israel, about God finding Israel and Israel finding God and bringing God to humankind. To me, this is incredible when we think about the notion of covenant. Number one, we start as a family. Number 2, we expand that family to a people. Number 3, we are in relationship to God. And number 4, what Genesis then allows us to do is have the framework, this sacred history for bringing God back into our bedtime stories. I often say that I can tell the names of the people 4 generations back, myself, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. I'd have to work hard to go beyond that. But then I go thousands of years back to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah and Moses and Aaron and Miriam and Joshua and Caleb. And I realize those are part of our bedtime stories as well. They are a part of all of our sacred history as a Jewish people. And there are so many other people that enter into that history, which I'm going to come back to. So then we move to Exodus, where we are tonight with Shavuot, thinking about this moment of revelation. But we can't receive Torah without thinking about covenant, without thinking about what might it have meant to stand at the bottom of Mount Sinai, getting ready to receive Torah, 600,000 people. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you hearken to my voice, indeed, if you listen to what I say and keep my covenant, then you shall be mine own treasure and Am Segula from among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine." Now, let me say clearly and unequivocally, this does not mean that the Jewish people are better than anybody else. We don't have a better relationship with God. We aren't chosen to be superior over people. It means we have a distinct relationship with God. It means we have obligations, and those obligations are formed through the Brit, through the covenant. And we observe them in 2 ways: by observing each ritual, but we do so in community. And we need to understand that. I often say, as a parent, when I had my second child, my heart expanded. I have enough love to go around, and I believe it is the same with God and multiple religions. God can have a unique relationship with us and still be in relationship with other faith communities. So what we're seeing here, though, is that the obligations that take place in Exodus, which we see in the 10 Commandments, go beyond just the sense of peoplehood, because the first 4 of the 10 Commandments are really all about the Jewish people's relationship with God. The 5th commandment is about honoring our parents. It's this, the link between how we honor God and how we honor others. And then the last 5 of the 10 commandments are about how we engage with other people. It does not specify Jews or non-Jews. It specifies that we have an obligation to act ethically and morally in the communities in which we live and serve. Let's keep going. Great. So now we get to Deuteronomy. So I'm jumping ahead. We get to Deuteronomy, and we are asked, "Now, Israel, what does God require of you? But to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all of God's ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command this day." So the rabbis love this text. They try to understand, well, what does it mean to walk after God? If we walk after God, aren't we going to get burned? So one of my favorite teachings, which I imagine many of my colleagues have taught as well, is from Sota 14a from the Talmud, where we read, what does the text mean to walk with God? Is it possible for a human being to walk after the Shekhinah, the divine presence? For hasn't it been said, for the Lord thy God is a devouring fire? But actually, the meaning is to walk after the attributes of God, blessed be he. As he clothes the naked, for it is written, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife coats of skin and clothed them, so too we clothe the naked. The Holy One, blessed be he, visited the sick, for it's written, and the Lord appeared unto him by the oaks of Mamre, so too we visit the sick. This is actually connecting back to what I said before, the connection between when God visited Avram after the circumcision. The Holy One, Blessed be he comforted mourners, for it is written, and it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed Isaac his son, that we should comfort mourners. The Holy One, blessed be he, buried the dead, for it's written, and he buried the dead in the valley, so we too should bury the dead. This, of course, is in relationship to Moshe. So we've seen this expansion that we go from a family to a people in covenant with God. And then we do have ritual obligations. It's not only about peoplehood, but it's not exclusively about ritual. So keep going. Great, you can go there. So I want to teach these two texts. The first from Abraham Joshua Heschel, when in his piece, I Asked for Wonder. Judaism is not only the adherence to particular doctrines and observances, but primarily living in the spiritual order of the Jewish people, the living in the Jews of the past and with the Jews of the present. It is not a doctrine, an idea, a faith, but the covenant between God and the people. Our share in holiness we acquire by living in Jewish community. Now, what's amazing right now is that the notion of Jewish community has been expanded, right? The virtual world has opened up so many things. We have somebody who comes on our minyan every single day from North Carolina. I say every day is bring your parents to work day. I have my mother come on every morning to minyan, my father come on every night. The idea is that we do Judaism in community, and we've expanded how community functions. And we're going to still figure this out as we slowly, carefully, and surely, and thank God, come out of this pandemic. But what I also think we understand from this piece about Heschel, and then what we'll see again with Dr. Eisen's piece, is that we need to know what it means to understand Jewish history. We need to know who the people are that made up the Jewish communities, and we need to be more expansive of that. Just as in America, there's been a reckoning, certainly over the last year, and it should have been longer, but certainly over the last year, of how do we tell the story of what American history means? The question is, how do we tell a story of what Jewish history is? How do we expand the voices? Who are the people that we need to know? If we know about Herzl, and we know about Achad Ha'am, do we know about Henrietta Zold? How do we know the stories of our Mizrahi cousins and friends and neighbors who are a part of the covenant of the Jewish people, but might have had a very different experience from what I visited when I was in Poland in 1993? How do we understand those differences, and how does it make a difference today? So Dr. Eisen writes, and this was on a Devar Torah that he wrote almost 10 years ago on Parshat Yitro. The revelation at Sinai does not pertain to God's essence, but to the gift of Jewish, and by extension, human obligation. The Torah aims at a far more than collective belief or individual enlightenment. Its point is nothing less than a different kind of world, composed of just and compassionate societies. Everything that each of us can bring to the work is needed: learning and experience, parenting and profession, art and science, knowledge and wisdom. The covenant demands that we fulfill it together. Torah requires, in a word, community. And that is what we need to figure out how to do. And I actually think it's one of the things that we need to work on reclaiming. I'll be honest, when I came home from that trip in 1993, and I had studied about the Holocaust and I had studied about Israel, and I was thinking, wow, so much of what I learned is about Jewish history, but what else is there? Is there joy in being Jewish? How do we express the joy? But I wonder, as over the last 20 plus years, we've been focusing on joy, which I think we should. I don't want to live a Jewish life because of guilt or because of victimhood or because of fear, but I do want to know our history. I also want to understand, how do we teach what it means to be a part of the Jewish people? One of my favorite things to do is work with conversion students. And in fact, this week I'm bringing 5 students to the mikveh. And I say my final question for them when they are standing in the mikveh before they immerse for the first time is, do you share in the destiny of the Jewish people? That's my final question, because I want them to understand that accepting God and striving to observe mitzvot and praying throughout the day and lighting Shabbat candles, those are all crucial. And you'll hear me talk about that if you come to my shul. But understand that we have a shared destiny is something crucial. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't be compassionate for others. As Chancellor Eisen shows here, that we need to create just and compassionate societies. And I think, unfortunately, and we're seeing this right now in real time, that people are confused. They think we can only argue either for ourselves or for other people. I think it's a both and. Yes, we need to celebrate and we need to hold up and we need to care deeply for the Jewish people. And when there's other people in pain, we need to cry alongside them too. That's okay. That doesn't take away from the covenantal value that we've talked about of it being a blessing. Okay, keep going with the next poem. Okay, so one of my favorite poems that I often talk about and teach on Shavuot, so apologies to members of my synagogue that have seen this before, is from Merle Felt. She's an incredible writer and poet, and she wrote the following. My brother and I were at Sinai. He kept a journal of what he saw, of what he heard, of what it all meant to him. I wish I had such a record of what happened to me there. It seems like every time I want to write, I can't. I'm always holding a baby, one of my own, or one for a friend, always holding a baby. So my hands are never free to write things down. And then as time passes, the particulars, the hard data, the who, what, when, where, why slip away from me. And all I'm left with is the feeling. But feelings are just sounds, the vowel, barking of a mute. My brother is so sure of what he heard. After all, he's got a record of it, consonant after consonant after consonant. If we remembered it together, we could recreate holy time, sparks flying. When I think about this text, I think about the importance of adding new voices, maybe voices that were there all the time that we didn't appreciate. For me, as a woman, this was a text that spoke to me. I feel tremendously blessed that I stand on the shoulders of women who paved the path for me to be a rabbi, men who opened up their hearts and their homes and their wisdom and their minds to teach me how to be a rabbi. And today we walk on this journey together as we write these words together and we think about what they mean. And we hope to inspire generations of Jews to enter into this covenant, but we can only do it by recognizing that there are more voices that we haven't even learned yet. Which brings me to the final two texts. Perfect. If you look at, or if you're asked, and you might be asked, is there a creed in Judaism? What does Judaism boil down to? I would argue it is the Shema. Why? Because the following. We say, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. People say this on their deathbed. People have said this as they were going to the gas chambers. But people say this at Yom Kippur. People say this every night. But why, to me, is this the creed? Because it combines both the people and God. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. Be a part of this. Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai Echad, there is one God. But you can't get to the one God without the people. Which brings me to my final text of the evening, and that is Ruth, which we'll be reading on Tuesday. The famous line, your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you will go, I will go. Ruth understood. She understood that being part of the Jewish community meant being a part of the people and being in relationship to God. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're studying as a group. We're observing ritual. And how are we doing that? By bringing Torah together. One last story, and then I'll finish up because I know that we're running out of time. Earlier this evening, we did a program with our synagogue where we watched a documentary about the Memorial Scrolls Trust, which is an organization which saved, recovered, and restored hundreds of Torahs that were saved from Europe after the war. We have one of those Torahs in our synagogue. And we talked about how the Torah is what binds us as a Jewish people. The Torah is filled with stories, it's filled with laws, and it's filled with the sacred history of our people. So I hope that however you're celebrating Shavuot, you have a Chag Sameach, a happy holiday, and that you feel proud to be a part of the Jewish people and figure out where are you in our people and what are you going to do for us. Thank you.
Rabbi Ain, thank you very much. Very insightful. A quick question. Where do you think we as a community can go to build these kind of connections, to build a better and stronger community?
Well, I think it takes relationships and, one person at a time. One thing that we've in fact learned over this past year, I think we've all learned a lot over this past year, is that when we bring small groups together, we can do that. So our morning minyan has brought people in who live up and down the East Coast. And every day, if there's somebody observing a yard site, they share the story of the person whose yard site they're honoring. That does two things. It gives them an opportunity to say Kaddish in the context of a minyan. But more than that, when we hear the story about that person, we put ourselves in their shoes and we wonder, where was our parents? Where were our grandparents at that moment? So I think that's one piece. And I think we need to be honest about the challenges. And I think we need to travel together. I know that sounds like a simple answer, but we need to be together. We need to understand history. And I hope that as we come out of this pandemic, we can all spend more time face to face. You're muted.
There we go. Obviously, a seminal moment in your life was traveling to Europe and seeing and experiencing the Holocaust first time. How much more of that? When should we be doing that, and how should we be doing that to really engage our history much stronger by being there?
Well, it's a great question. I have two sons, one who's entering 11th grade and one son who's entering 8th grade. And I certainly don't think till at least the end of high school, I think we should be teaching our kids about the Shoah, but I don't think we should exclusively be teaching about that. That's why I think that we should be talking about Jewish communities worldwide. And I think that educational institutions have gotten much better about that, because then it shows that Jews look different, sound different, are different. I think that it would be great if synagogues, and maybe there can be cooperations between smaller shuls, because it's not always easy to travel. We do that. I'm a huge proponent of Jewish summer programs, be it Camp Ramah, USY, other programs. There are so many out there. I don't want to start advertising too many or I'm going to get myself in trouble. But I think that people feeling in community is important. Something else that I'll share, and I know we need to finish up, is how do we bring our young adults together, people in their 20s and 30s who are seeking Jewish life. That's something that we've focused on at Sutton Place, but in a way that doesn't feel like a meat market, but in a way that gives tremendous value and Torah study. That's what we've been doing, is giving people content, and actually in just half an hour, we have our young professionals Torah study that we do. But I think there's lots of different things we can do.
Okay, thank you very much. Everything you're doing, it sounds like you're so busy. Thank you for taking time to participate in this. And again, thanks to everybody who's participating, and will continue to participate until 12 o'clock tomorrow, noontime. And we look forward to continued participation. Rabbi Ain, thank you. And we'll let you go back and teach more people. So it's great.
All right, Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Bye, Ed.
Hi, Rachel.